This was in 2020. I had just gotten out of a bad relationship and needed to clear my head. I live in Washington, and there's this huge forest about 2 hours east of Seattle. Not a national park or anything, just a big expanse of wilderness with no real tourist traffic. I camped in parts of it before with friends, but I wanted to try doing it solo this time. I picked a spot deep in the woods that I'd read about on some backcountry forums. It was supposed to be peaceful and secluded miles from the nearest road or trail. Just what I was looking for. I packed like just a one-person tent, some food, a knife, flashlight, and a portable stove. I also brought my satellite phone just in case. I drove out early in the morning, parked off an old gravel service road, then hiked about 6 miles through some overgrown brush to reach the clearing. It was beautiful when I got there. Tall pines all around me, soft moss on the ground, no litter, no signs anyone had been there in a long time. I set up my tent under a tree and gathered some wood to make a small fire. Nothing crazy, just enough to cook and keep warm. The first day was pretty uneventful. I listened to music on my phone. For a bit, read a book, and then just kind of sat and watched the forest. As the sun went down, the woods got really quiet. I thought I'd be used to that kind of silence from past trips, but something about being alone made it feel different. It was like the air got thicker. I didn't sleep great. That first night, not because of anything specific, but just the normal sounds of the forest. Branches creaking, animals scurrying. They hit different when you're the only person around for miles. The next morning I made coffee and decided to explore a little deeper into the woods. I wasn't planning to go far, maybe half a mile, but I left some gear behind and took my knife and a water bottle just to walk around. About 20 minutes in, I noticed something weird. It was like there was a trail, not a man-made one, but a sort of natural path. The ground was a little more worn, fewer bushes. At first I thought it was maybe a deer trail, but then I saw something hanging from a tree branch up ahead. It was a strip of red cloth, tied into a knot like a makeshift marker. I figured maybe a hunter had been through here at some point, but it still gave me a weird feeling, especially because I saw another one, about 100 feet further down. Same kind of knot, same cloth. I kept going, now more curious than anything, and after a while I came across something even stranger. There was this old, rotten wooden structure tucked between the trees. Not a cabin exactly, just for walls and a partial roof. Almost like someone had started building a shelter and then abandoned it. I walked up to it and peeked inside. Nothing really, just dirt, some rocks and a pile of bones in the corner. Looked like deer bones maybe, but the weird part was that they were arranged in a neat little circle. I didn't like that. I got this sudden sense that I was being watched. No noise, no movement, but just that instinctive chill in your spine when you know you're not alone. I turned around and made my way back to my campsite a little faster than I'd planned. The red cloth markers were still there, but this time I counted them. 5 total, leading right back in the direction of my tent. By the time I got back, the sun was already starting to go down. I decided I'd pack up and leave early the next morning. Just didn't feel right staying another night. As it got dark, I stayed inside my tent and kept the fire low. At around 10 or so, I heard footsteps. They weren't heavy or rushed, just slow and deliberate, crunching softly through the brush. Maybe 20 feet from my tent. I held my breath and listened. The steps circled around once, then again, then they stopped completely. I had my knife in my hand and my flashlight ready, but I didn't make a sound. It was probably a full hour before I moved again. At some point I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes it was just past 3 a.m. and something was touching the tent. Not pushing hard, just the lightest dragging sound, like fingers running along the fabric. I whispered hello, before I could stop myself, and whatever it was went still. I sat there, frozen. Then the footsteps started again, walking away this time. I didn't wait until morning. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could, grabbed my stuff, and started walking with my flashlight and GPS. The whole time I kept feeling like something was behind me, but every time I turned around, there was nothing there. It took me nearly 3 hours to hike back to the car. When I finally got there and turned on the engine, I sat in the driver's seat shaking. I still don't know who or what was out there, but I'll never go camping alone again.
This happened in 2018. I had taken some time off work after a few stressful months and rented a small off-grid cabin in the mountains. It was one of those simple one-room wooden cabins with no electricity or plumbing, just a fireplace and a cot. The property backed right up to national forest land, and the closest neighbor was about 3 miles away. It was exactly the kind of alone time I needed. Just a week with no phone, no internet, no noise. It was just a bunch of rocks, but there was this heaviness in the air, like I was somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. At first I thought it was just an animal, but then I heard what sounded like sticks being stacked. But right off the path in front of the cabin, there was a new little stack of rocks, smaller than the ones I saw in the clearing, but the same design, neatly stacked, smooth stones. I hadn't built that. I picked it up and scattered the stones without really thinking, then went about my day trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe I just missed it yesterday. Not broken, set down, slowly, carefully. There was no moon that night, so I couldn't see anything out the cabin window. I kept glancing toward the window, listening for anything, and sure enough, around midnight, I heard the same soft stacking sounds again. I turned off the firelight and sat in total silence. This time, I could hear breathing, slow, deep breathing just outside the wall of the cabin. I didn't have the nerve to open the door. When I opened the door in the morning, there were 3 stone piles in front of the cabin, and this time, one of them had something underneath, a piece of fur, matted and brown, with a weird smell like mold or rot. Instead, I just sat there in the dark, listening until it stopped maybe 10 minutes later. I didn't care about my food or supplies. I walked the 3 miles to where ID parked on the forest road and didn't look back once. I drove straight home and never returned to that cabin or that area, and they didn't want to be alone. I didn't stay long. I turned around and walked back to the cabin, trying to brush it off. The first 2 days were peaceful. I spent most of the time reading in the sun and hiking a little deeper into the woods behind the cabin each day. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you realize how loud the world normally is. There wasn't any real trail to follow, just game paths and broken branches. About an hour out, I found this big flat clearing in the middle of the forest. The way the trees opened up so suddenly felt weird, like something had cleared it on purpose. I don't mean with a bulldozer or anything. It just looked unnatural, like the trees had been removed carefully. The only sounds were wind in the trees, birds, and the occasional squirrel rustling leaves. On the 3rd day, I decided to explore a little further than before. What really stood out, though, was what was in the middle of the clearing. There were several little stacks of stones, maybe 3 or 4 of them, each one about knee-high and shaped into neat little towers. They looked like cairns, but not the kind hikers use. They were too deliberately placed, too symmetrical almost, like they were meant to be symbolic or ritualistic or something. I walked around them a bit and honestly felt uneasy. I don't know why. That night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to a noise outside. The next morning, I stepped out and looked around. Nothing. No footprints, no signs of anyone. That night, I stayed up late by the fire inside the cabin. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. It stayed like that for maybe 5 minutes, then slowly faded. I lost it at that point, grabbed my bag, threw everything into it, and left. I didn't care about the rental period. I looked up the property later and saw that it was pulled from the rental site a few months after. No reviews, no listing, no trace. I don't know what was out there, and I don't really want to, but something or someone was living in those woods. I'm a 29-year-old guy from Western Oregon, and I've always had a deep love for nature. This happened just last summer, when I decided to spend a few days completely off-grid, no cell service. No GPS, no distractions, just me in the woods. I backpacked about 5 miles into a national forest I knew well, then veered off onto a lesser-used game trail. I wanted a spot where I could feel totally alone. No other campers, no rangers, no noise. Sure enough, about 10 feet from my tent, in the muddy edge of the creek, was a single boot print. I waited until the flames were almost out before crawling back into my tent, but this time, it wasn't sound that woke me. It was the feeling, like I wasn't alone. Then I heard it breathing, not mine, not an animal huffing through the trees. It was right outside the tent, while slow, heavy breathing, and then a shadow passed by, blocking out the moonlight through the tent fabric for just a second. Whoever it was, They were standing just inches away, and I slept with my flashlight in one hand and a camping knife in the other, too large to be mine. It was deep-like. Someone had been standing there a while. I spent most of the day debating whether to pack up and head back. I didn't even blink. The breathing got louder closer, then it stopped, and after a few seconds of silence, they dragged their fingers across the tent fabric. One long, slow stroke like they were tracing the outline of my body from the outside. I wanted to scream, to burst out with the knife, to shine my flashlight to anything, but I couldn't. I just laid there, heart racing, gripping the knife so hard my hand went numb. Then the breathing started again, ... but farther away. Whoever it was, they were walking off into the woods. But I'd come out here to clear my head, and I didn't want to be scared off by something that might have a simple explanation. At first light, I packed everything in under 10 minutes and hiked out. Didn't eat, didn't drink, just moved. When I made it back to my car, I felt like I could finally breathe again. Maybe a hunter wandered through. Maybe they didn't even see my tent, and I don't know if I ever will. It's the kind of quiet that can either calm you or mess with your head. For me, it's usually peaceful. That first night, I set up camp next to a small creek. There were no signs of recent human activity, and the nearest road was over an hour's hike away. I just laid there, hand gripped around it, barely breathing. Eventually, the sound stopped. I told myself it was probably nothing, just forest noise playing tricks on me, and somehow I fell back asleep. I cooked a small dinner on my camp stove, sat by the creek until the sun dipped below the trees, then zipped myself into my tent. Around midnight, I woke up to a sound. It wasn't loud, more like a soft crunch of leaves underfoot. I laid there still, just listening. Sometimes deer wander close to camp, or raccoons dig around for scraps. But this sounded ... slower, more deliberate. It would crunch for a few seconds, then stop. A minute would pass. Then another crunch. Whatever it wasn't moving like an animal. It felt like someone trying not to be heard. I quietly unzipped my sleeping bag just enough to grab my flashlight, but I didn't turn it on. The next morning, I stepped out to make coffee and check for tracks. That night, I kept a fire going longer than usual. At around 3 a.m., I woke up again. I didn't move. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I never reported it. What would I even say? But I haven't been back to that part of the forest since.